name's Maggie, and I am an alcoholic.
Maggie.
And if I don't trip over the cord and collapse this thing, I'll be doing okay. I'm kind of a klutz. I am so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me out here. This is an honor. It really is. And happy anniversary to the, let me say it right, Fellowship of the Spirit Big Book Study. I just can't do the letter ones. F-O-B. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great meeting. And Frank spoke here last year, right?
I think it was, yeah.
Was it last year?
Yeah, Frank.
Yeah. So now you get to hear the other side of the story.
You're going to get the truth now. That's a tough group.
And happy birthday to AA. Isn't that awesome? 81 years.
Here.
We're really lucky. I love the big book, and I'll tell you what, the first time I opened this book was in October of 1988, and I was like, this is so boring. There's nothing here for me. Really. And I read the steps, and I'm like, I don't see how these can help me. I had so many problems, and they didn't seem to address any of my problems. So, but later on, when I worked the steps with a sponsor, and of course we opened this book together. And once I had a spiritual awakening, there was all kinds of stuff in here that wasn't in here before. And really profound spiritual principles in this book. It's funny. Perception, I guess, is what it is. Just to tell you a little bit about my story. I grew up in Hayward, California. Now, there's got to be someone here from Hayward, right? Wow. Okay, there you go. Qualifies. That qualifies. We've been on the road speaking a lot, and, everywhere I go, there's someone from Hayward. It's really weird. There's nothing special about Hayward, except that me and Victor Silva came from there. Yeah.
Sick.
Yeah, sick. And Victor likes to point out that the term hella, like hella good or hell, came from Hayward. It did. And you're really not supposed to say that unless you're from Hayward. That's what I think. But I'll give you guys permission. That's okay if you want to do that. So this is a hella good program. And so I grew up in Hayward. My father was an alcoholic. He, my mom and dad had 5 kids. Grown up in Hayward, he was a printer. He worked for the Oakland Tribune. And he was a periodic drinker. And I think periodic drinkers are really weird. They're puzzling. They're baffling, especially when you don't know anything about alcoholism. Because he could go months, weeks, months, years without putting a drink in. And I'm sure he was restless, irritable, and discontent. He was pissed off all the time. Maybe that had something to do with it. But he'd always start drinking again. And once he started drinking, he didn't go to work. He drank around the clock, Jim Beam whiskey. And he embarrassed me a lot. Because, to me, it was like, the other dads in the neighborhood aren't like my dad. I mean, if they were, I didn't notice it. My dad was like, would wear his pajamas outside to the park, to the store. He's in his pajamas. And he'd have a sailor hat on. And he had a girlfriend, a redhead. I don't even know who that was. But and my friends, when I was like in junior high, would see my dad sitting at the park in his pajamas and a sailor hat with his arm around a redhead. And they'd be like, is that your dad? And I'm like, no, that's not my dad. Let's go this way. So, I was really kind of mad at my dad for this really odd bizarre behavior that I didn't understand. My mom used to tell me, your dad is sick, and I wasn't buying it. To me, it was, he has bad behavior, and he does that just to embarrass me, because it's all about me. And but what ended up happening with him is he died. He died of alcoholism at 47 years old. He would go on these drunken binges for a couple of months, and then my mom and her parents would get him into Napa State Hospital, which is where they took drunks back in the 60s. And he would detox there and spend a little vacation, and then he'd come back. And that, I think he'd been in there 11 times. And the 11th time he went in there, he died. He died strapped down to a table in the DTs, and he choked on his own vomit. So, that, I can tell you that I didn't know how to process those kind of feelings when I was 15 years old. I just knew this: I'm never going to be like him. If that's what alcohol does to you, to a person, who would choose that kind of life? Really, who in this room would choose that kind of life to live? But when you first start drinking, it doesn't look like that, does it? Alcohol drinking looks really fun when you first start out. I mean, I know you puke and pass out in the wrong places and get in trouble and all that stuff, but still, it's still fun though. Otherwise, we wouldn't keep doing it. So, I did start drinking. I can't remember, like, some people can pinpoint that first drink. I can't. I was in high school. I know that it was probably, I was over my friend Terry's house, and Terry's parents had a liquor cabinet. My parents didn't have a liquor cabinet. Our liquor cabinet was inside the toilet tank with the Jim Beam. That's it. And I wasn't going for that one, no. Not going for that one. That seemed extreme to me. But his parents had a liquor cabinet, very lovely. A lot of different bottles that we didn't know what it was. Vermouth and scotch and liqueurs, real pretty green stuff. And they had decanters and pitchers. And I never messed with all that stuff, you guys, but, it was kind of pretty. And so I said, well, what bottle should we choose? He goes, what's that one that starts with a B? I said, it says Vermouth. And I said, let's drink this. So I just poured us each a glass of vermouth, and drank it. We didn't know. It was nasty. But, then we tried another bottle. Pretty soon, I'm high, and I like it. I like being high. So I drank every chance I could get in high school. It wasn't every day because obviously when you're underage, it's you have to, go through certain hassles to get alcohol. But, we'd get it nonetheless, and we called it partying back then. And living in Hayward, and I lived across the street from this park called Weeks Park, and it was the place. Cheryl might know about that. Cheryl's from the Bay Area, not quite Hayward, but near there. And that's where you would go. They would have this thing called drop-in, and you can go over there, and you can hang out, and you can get drunk, and you can get high, and you can do whatever you want over there. And that's where everybody was. And so we'd hang out there. And at that time, my allowance was $1 a week. And I could get a pack of cigarettes for 50 cents. And a bottle, I could get a bottle for 50 cents or part of a bottle. So that's what we did. So that went on for a while. I was going to high school. I was failing high school because I didn't like to go to class. They want you to show up for class in high school. Or I'd be taken off at lunchtime. And but luckily I worked in the attendance office. That's a good thing when you cut a lot. So I had access to attendance slips. So I would write a letter from my mom excusing me, and then I would transfer the information to an attendance slip and I would turn it in. And they'd take it. They didn't even look, So easy. So I did graduate from high school. And on it went. So shortly after graduating from high school, I wanted to take a break from school because it was, of course you want a break from school when you graduate from high school. But my mom had other ideas, and she said, no, you're either going to get a job or you're going to go to college. And I didn't want any of those prospects, but, she said, that's what you're doing. So I went to college for 2 weeks, and I didn't like it. It's school is school, okay. So that didn't work out, so I had to get a job. So I got a job at a little dress shop called Hartfield's, and I worked in there, and I was, that was so long ago. People used to walk around that store smoking. That was how long ago it was. Just smoking a cigarette, looking at the clothes, and I worked there, and I'd been there about 2 months, and I went up to my boss, and I said, look, I need to get a vacation, because I wanted to go to Tahoe. And she goes, a vacation? You've only been here 2 months. And I said, yeah, time for a vacation. I had no idea, you guys. I was just completely clueless. And she said, no, you don't get a vacation until you've been here for a year. So I quit. I quit and went to Tahoe. Anyway, that's kind of my mentality back then. I was over at that Weeks Park one night, and this 1957 Dodge station wagon pulled up. It had pink curtains. And the driver's side door opened, and a man fell out. And he had no shirt on. He had wine stains on his chest. And he pulled himself up on the side of the car. This is my future husband. Pulled himself up, and not him, the first one. Now that could have been him. I've heard stories about this one here. Yeah, I know all the secrets. Anyway, he said, he told me later, he said, I looked at you and there was a halo over your head. Of course there was a halo over my head. And he came up and he asked me if I want to go to party with him. He could barely stand, and I said, no, I'm not going to party with you. Anyway, we ended up at the same party. We started dating. He asked me out on a date, and he came to my mom's house, and he knocked on the door to pick me up. And he escorted me out. He met my mom, escorted me out to the car, opened the passenger just like a gentleman, and an empty bottle of wine and 2 empty beer cans fell out and rolled down the hill. And I smiled. And I said, I'm going to have a good time tonight. He's 22 years old. He can buy alcohol. And so that was very attractive to me at the time. And so we used to drink. That was our deal. Drink, 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 drink. And, when I first started out drinking, let me tell you this. I couldn't even finish a can of Old English 800. That was what we drank. Old English 800, talls. I couldn't even finish the can, and I'd be passed out. I was a very cheap date. At the end of my drinking, I could drink any guy under the table. And I was very proud of that. Years later, I remember I was sitting at a bar, the Pall Mall Club on Florin Road. And it was 8:30 in the morning. And there were some guys behind me, and they were playing pool. And they were talking about me. One of the guys said, who's that chick at the bar with the blonde hair? Oh, that's Maggie. What's the deal with her? She's a lush. That's what I heard. She's a lush. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't. I was pissed. Really mad. And then it dawned on me, it's 8:30 in the morning. That's what my drinking progressed to. So I'm married. I'm 19 years old. I'm married. The party's at our house every night. And I'm working at Liberty House department store in junior lingerie. And he's working at a sheet metal shop. And I'm bringing the girls home from work every night, and he's bringing the guys home, and we got a case of beer, and we got bottles of wine, and it was on. It was on, and it was every night. And I'll tell you what, our neighbors hated us. Hated us. We were your worst nightmare. I know you guys have all had a neighbor like that at one time or another. We would stay up every night, 2, 3 in the morning. We loved music. We loved our record player, and we had big speakers, and we would turn them all the way up. Selfish, self-centered. It never occurred to me that that might bother the people in our apartment building. Not once. It's like when they called the cops, and the cops came, or we would get evicted from the place, to me it was, I am so tired of intolerant people. You know, that's all it was, just really, really selfish. Somewhere during the night, I would pass out, and it was always in front of the bathroom for some reason, in the shag carpet. And but I'd get up the next morning and take a shower, and you could bounce back for a while. Go to work. My hangover would probably be burned off by 1 o'clock, and I'd be ready to go again. Youth, it didn't stay like that. We started to have problems in our lives. This thing about the cops being called and fights breaking out, and our telephone would get turned off. We didn't have cell phones back then. We had house phones, and they could turn them off, and that would happen. Our rent, by the way, was $75 a month, and most of the time we couldn't pay the rent. We're both working because we had other things to spend our money on, alcohol. So we're having these problems and issues, and I got fired from my job, and I got another job, and I got fired from that job because just like school, they want you to show up. They want you to come every day, and they want you to stay there, and they want you to work. And I couldn't seem to do that. That's just the way it was. So after losing a number of jobs, I got the bright idea to go to work for a temporary service. It's called Apple One Temporary Service. So the beauty about that, and to any alcoholic, I would recommend this, because you could get assigned to a job. They'd say, Maggie, we need you to go out and work at the Rubberband Factory. So I got to the Rubberband Factory, and my job was to answer the phone. And I would be really, really good for about 4 or 5, maybe 6, 7 days. I'd be the best phone answerer at the Rubberband Factory ever had. Just really good. Looking for stuff to do, doing extra work. Excuse me. But then I would start going out to lunch and not coming back till 2:30 because a drink at lunch is very pleasant when you drink like me, and or sometimes I wouldn't come back at all, or I wouldn't show up, and that started happening again. So alcoholics have antennas as to when their boss is starting to get upset with them and when they're about to be let go. Maybe you guys have experienced this. I could always tell the day I was going to be let go. They were going to call the agency, and they were going to say, look, what kind of joke is this? This woman doesn't show up. When she does show up, she leaves early. She has alcohol in her breath. We don't want her anymore. But see, I would always beat them to the punch, and I'd call my agency, and I'd say, I want to get reassigned. And they'd say, okay, come on in. And so I'd get reassigned to another job, and this went on and on and on and on. After the first year of working for that place, I got an award as Best Employee of the Year. That's skill. In the doctor's opinion here, not when I first read it, but later, it says that, of course, everyone knows it says men and women drink essentially because they have the effect produced by alcohol. Duh. I can't fathom why anyone would drink except for the effect produced by alcohol. I still don't know why anyone would drink for any other reason. I just don't. It goes on to say in there that that alcoholic life becomes the only normal one. So all these shenanigans that I was pulling with my job, and I lived in 17 different apartment buildings in a short amount of time, getting the phone turned off, getting the gas turned off, neighbors getting mad, the police coming, broken windows, all that stuff became normal to me. It was a normal life to me. And all the people that I hung out with had that same life. So that made it even more normal. Oh, your phone's turned off. Yeah, mine is too. You know, that damn phone company. The other thing that was going on at the time was that I could never take responsibility for anything that was negative in my life. It was always your fault. I have a magical alcoholic mind that can twist and turn and rationalize and justify, and pretty soon, within a short time, I could make everything your fault. And that went on for a long time. You know, I would take these little mini inventories when things were going bad, and I would always find a culprit. Frank and I like to call it a blame thrower, where, you know, we just set it up and burn them. It's your fault. The only problem with that is when everything's always your fault, then I can't do anything about my life. Because I can't change you. I can only change me. And I didn't learn about that until I got into Alcoholics Anonymous. So we go on, and I decided at one of my little inventories that maybe I should get pregnant, that would probably solve a lot of problems that I have. So 4 years into the marriage, I get pregnant, and I have a baby boy. And he is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And I'm thinking, all this time I'm pregnant, you know, this baby is going to change my life. This baby is going to make me grow up. I won't have to drink as much as I have been because it just solves everything. For some reason, in my alcoholic mind, this baby was going to save me. And we know that no human power, no matter how cute and had golden curly hair and big blue eyes, cannot save me from alcoholism. No human power. And so that didn't work. In fact, my drinking kept getting worse. It was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And I was having more and more problems. You know, I went to a psychiatrist, and he asked me how much I was drinking, and I was being conservative. I said, oh, just like a bottle a night. You know, really it was like 3 bottles a night and of wine. And so he said, you know, you shouldn't drink so much. You're drinking too much. And I said, oh, okay. He said, I'm going to give you some pills to take so that you won't drink so much. He said, but the number one rule is do not drink when you take these pills. Okay. Whew, man, that was a wild ride. Between the two of those, sedative and alcohol, I would have these in and out blackouts all day long. 20 minutes in, 20 minutes out, 20 minutes in. I'd come out of a blackout standing at a stove. I'm cooking something, and I've got 4 little kids running around, and they all want something. I don't know what's going on, and it just was horrible. It was horrible for those kids, and it was a horrible way to live. And of course, always in alcoholism, when you think it can't get any worse, it gets worse. And so by this time, we're living down in South Sac. I'm running off to the Pall Mall Club all the time. I'm leaving my kids at home alone while their dad's at work. Or I'm leaving them in the car in the bar parking lot so I can run in. And I swear to God, every single time I did that, I was only going to have one drink. I was only going to have one drink just to take the edge off. And I was going to get back in the car and take them home. But it never worked out that way. It never worked out that way because I have alcoholism. And I didn't even know what that meant. That means that when I run into the Pall Mall Club to have one drink to take the edge off, my 4 kids are sitting in the Volkswagen bus in the parking lot. I don't know that once I get that drink in front of me and I put it in my body, it sets up phenomenon of craving. I think I changed my mind. I'm going to have one more.
Yeah.
2 is not going to make any difference. So I'd order another one. And then I'd order another one. And then I've kind of lost track. And those kids were out there for hours. You know, I've talked to a lot of places, and a lot of a significant amount of people have come up to me after meetings and said, I was the kid in the car. And I always make amends to them. I've made amends to my kids, but I always make amends to them for their parents, just in case they didn't. This is uncontrolled drinking by this time. All kinds of things happen. I would go through periods where I would try to not drink. And every period after trying to not drink always got worse. Trying to not drink for a week and a half resulted in now I'm ordering doubles. You know, I did all the little alcoholic tricks that we do. Like I'd go to Brother Oliver's with the girls after work. My plan was always the same. We'd go over there about 4:30. We were going to have a couple of drinks. It's happy hour. Happy hour. Happy hour. Drink for an hour, and then you just go home, right? That's what everybody else did. And, you know, I never stayed in that happy hour. I went to happy 2 hour and happy the bar's closing now every single time. And everyone at work knew it because I'd call in sick the next day because I was so hungover. Phenomenon of craving, operative in my life. When I tried to stop drinking, the phenomenon of craving would get 100 times worse. When I tried to stop drinking, the mental obsession would be on me like crazy, absolutely crazy. I can remember times when I had been maybe sober 3 days. I was about to go out of my mind, and I would say, I'm not going to the liquor store, I'm not going to the liquor store, I'm not going to the liquor store, and go into some kind of brownout and walk to the liquor store and be back in the house with a bottle without even realizing what had happened. I went on a little bender one day in July of 1988, and I came home 3 days later. This is not unusual. I did it all the time. I came home 3 days later, and that husband and those kids were gone. And they had left a note. And they moved to Hayward. And that precipitated even worse drinking. And I lost that house that we were renting, and lost my car, couldn't get a job. The last job I had was at an AM/PM at Eastern and Marconi. And I couldn't keep that job because Ernie's Interlude was right across the street. And I'd see the sign, Ernie's Interlude. Just, you know, at the counter, Ernie's Interlude. And it's calling to me, you know how that is? I know, as soon as I get off work, I'm going to go into Ernie's Interlude and I'm going to have one drink. And then I'm going to go back to my mom's house where I was living. And, you know, there was some really friendly men at Ernie's Interlude. And they liked to buy me drinks. And sometimes I'd have like 7 drinks. And, of course, I could blame it on them. You guys, you know, if someone buys you a drink, you have to drink it, don't you? That's what I always thought. It would be rude not to drink it. So I'd have 7 drinks. Boom, boom, boom. That was the last job I'd had in a long, long time. I got fired from that place. We got robbed, and then I got fired. So I got to a point where my mom says, you can't live here anymore. I got to a point where I hadn't talked to my kids in months. Every time I tried to call Hayward to talk to my kids, I'd get hanged up on because my kid's dad he never went to Al-Anon in his life, but he has all the skills of an Al-Anon. He would hear my voice and say, "Get help," and hang up. Every time. So here's my turning point. I'm out at Mirage's one night and in North Highlands, and I'm supposed to meet someone out there. It was a guy that was trying to help me get sober. And I don't know why we were going to a bar for that, but anyway. He worked at McClellan. But he didn't show up. And so I went to the phone booth and I was going to call someone to come get me because I think walked almost all the way from downtown to Mirage's, and in high heel boots and hot pants. Okay. I went to the phone, and I had money for a phone call, and there was not one person, and I knew everyone's number, but there was not one person that was taking a phone call from me. And that was the moment of clarity. That was like, at that moment, I could not find anyone to blame for what I'd done to my life. All of that came crashing down on me. Later on, reading the big book, I love this on page 24. It says, "The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink." When I lost that, I don't know. I used to think about it. It must have been when I was 24 years old and we went to Yosemite and we went on that camping trip. And I try to pinpoint it, but I don't know when I lost control. Maybe I never had control. I don't know. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering of a day or a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. I didn't know that. But I didn't know that at the time. I have this moment of clarity, and I'm like, oh shit. And through a set of circumstances, and I said the alcoholic prayer, "God, please help me." I didn't want anything to do with God, but I didn't know what else to do. "God, please help me." And within a few days, I was sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. This was October of 1988. My very first meeting. I was sitting in the back row with my mom. I had her clothes on. I don't know what happened to my clothes. I remember they asked for newcomers. I did not raise my hand. I wasn't going to cop to it. And the chairperson that night was a man by the name of Arnold W. And some people in here know him. And I remember he started talking, and in my head I said, "I'd never drink with this guy. I don't drink with insurance salesmen." And I thought, that's bull. You drink with anyone that bought you a drink. He started telling his story, and he started talking about things. He's talking the language of the heart, but I don't even know what that is. But he's talking about his drinking, and he's talking about embarrassing things that have happened to me that also happened to him. And I can't understand why he's saying that stuff out loud, because it's against my nature to reveal to you anything that's embarrassing or anything that makes me look bad or weak. And here he is just spouting all this stuff off, and I am identifying with this guy left and right. And I'll tell you, identification seems to be important around Alcoholics Anonymous. When we're sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and we're new, I think it's really important that in our fellowship that we identify the problem that we have. We all have the same problem. We're all wrecked in the same vessel, and we all have a common solution. But at that time, at my first meeting, I started to feel uncomfortable. I started to think, I might be an alcoholic. I might be an alcoholic. And then he started calling on people, and every single person in that room, when they talked, turned around and looked at me when they were commenting on the topic. And I thought, why is everyone looking at me? I was embarrassed. How they knew I was new, And then, of course, then they all rushed up to me afterwards and hugged me and gave me phone numbers, and someone gave me a big book. And this is what I heard that night. Get a sponsor. Get a sponsor as quickly as possible. And start working the steps that are in this book. You see them up on the wall? Those are the steps that I looked at and said, I just don't see how those can help me, but I didn't say that to them because I didn't want to hurt their feelings. They said, get a sponsor, start working the steps with that sponsor. Come to a lot of meetings. It's important that when you're new, especially, that you go to a lot of meetings and that you come into this fellowship. And get into service as soon as you can, even if it's a small job like pouring coffee or making coffee or setting up chairs. Do something like that, and you're going to be okay. And I just I'm not doing any of that. I didn't say that to them, but I just decided right there and then that this was not for me. Because if you'd asked me then, Maggie, do you think you're an alcoholic? Do you think you possibly be an alcoholic? I would tell you this. I know I look like an alcoholic and I burn my life to the ground, and I know a lot of it's my fault, but I'm not really like you. Because part of my spiritual malady is that I'm separate. I'm separate from you. I'm separate from God. It's me, Maggie here, and then all the rest of the world over here. And that I know that today, that's my spiritual malady, and it was operative at that time. And sometimes I would think, maybe you are an alcoholic, but my ego would always talk me out of that. I stayed around for about 9 months with no sponsor. I had that big book that guy gave me, and I read one or two of the stories in the back, and I couldn't understand any of the stuff in front, like I was telling you earlier. It just didn't apply to me, and I didn't get it. I went to meetings for a while, and then I got my kids back because their dad found out that I was sober, and he was exhausted, let me tell you, with 4 kids. And I had a little apartment by then, and he dropped them off and gave them back to me. So I didn't have time for meetings now because I'm too busy being a mom. And I remember a lady in AA, I did go to a meeting one night, and I hadn't been in a couple of months, and she said, I haven't seen you at meetings, Maggie, what's going on? And I said, I don't have time to go to meetings. I got my kids back. And she got mad, and she put her finger out, and it was almost touching my chest. And she said, when you drink again, you're not going to be able to be a mom. You're just going to be a drunk, and you're going to lose those kids again. And I said, that's not going to happen. I'm sober now. And guess what? I got drunk. I got drunk 9 months in to that little thing. And here's how I got drunk. I was at my mom's house, and I was cleaning her house, and I was having a great day. I talked to my sister on the phone that day, my sister Betsy, who also had come into AA when I came in October of 1988. She said, I talked to you that morning, and it was just like in the big book. It was a beautiful day, not a cloud on the horizon. I was feeling good. I was feeling fine. I talked to my sister. She said, if someone had told me that you were going to drink that day, I'd have called him a liar. There was no way. Cunning, baffling, and powerful. I'm getting done cleaning my mom's house, and I said to myself in my head, I ought to go over to Bob's place in Elk Grove. It's a bar out there. And just have a Coke. And let my bar friends know I'm okay. Because I'm thinking they're wondering, where's Maggie? That's not the case, of course, but... So I felt it was my duty to go to the bar and have a Coke and let them know I was okay. And I went to the bar, and I sat down. It was daylight on a Friday. And I went to order a Coke. And what came out of my mouth was 7 and 7. And I was shocked. I really was. That's how disconnected I was from myself. My thoughts and my feelings were so disconnected that I didn't even know that. So while I'm waiting and she's making my drink, I'm thinking, uh-oh, I think this is what they were talking about in AA. And I remember they said it was the first drink that got me drunk. So even if I had this first drink, I'm probably going to keep drinking. That's what they said. And that seems to be what my experience is. And they said, call us before you take a drink. I remember thinking that. And I looked over at the phone booth, and I'm like, oh, no. And then she sets the drink down in front of me. And, I just read in here, there are times we are without defense against the first drink. I don't know what was going on that day. I paused for about 3 minutes looking at that drink and thinking, I could get up right now and I could walk out of here. And I can get in my car and I can go back home. And I don't have to take that. I don't have to pick up that drink. That's what I'm telling myself. And then just a second later, I picked it up and drank it. I put alcohol in my body. It becomes medically necessary for me to have a second drink, and a third, and a fourth. And 3 days later, I'm down on Auburn Boulevard in Cisco's, sitting at the bar. That was the worst drunk of my life, and all kinds of stuff happened that weekend that I'm not even going to get into. It was horrible. My sister finally came and got me. She just showed up there. She was driving around looking for me. She was just going to all the bars between North Highlands and Galt, because I would drink all over the place. And the reason I did that is because in my head they were looking for me. I don't know who they were, but somehow in my mind they were always looking for me, so I had to move around a lot. Psychosis, I think. She found me, and I said, what are you doing here? And she said, I'm here to take you home. And I said, I'm not ready to go home. And she said, okay, I'll wait. She was 8 months pregnant. So she's sitting on a bar stool next to me. She said I had 17 kamikazes while she was sitting there. I don't remember that. I think what I remember about that day was my body was drunk, but my head wasn't. My mind wasn't. And that's horrible. It's horrible. I finally said, I'm ready to go home now. I made her stop at the store and get me a pint. She took me home, she put me to bed, and she took my kids back to her house. And that was June 4th, 1989. The next 3 days, I'm not really sure. I know I weaned myself off. I had to do that because I'm one of those alcoholics that have seizures. I had horrible withdrawals from 3 days of drinking after 9 months of not drinking. And I don't know what that's about, but physically I was almost the sickest I've ever been in my life. Probably had alcohol poisoning, I don't know. On June 7, 1989, I was sober. I woke up sober and I said, I'm going to a meeting today. I got in my car and I drove to a traditional group, and it was over on Cody. I walked up to the door and there was a guy standing out there. His name's Johnny Dell. I don't know where he is nowadays, but he said, hi Maggie, it's good to see you again. Can I get you a cup of coffee? And he went and got me half a cup of coffee, and I sat down and I cried through that whole meeting. Now, what I got out of that drunk, and I'm grateful for it today, you guys, because it was the drunk that took away all doubt. I couldn't tell you anymore, like, I'm not really like you. After that drunk, it was like, I'm exactly like you. I might be worse than you. I don't know. I am an alcoholic. I have no control over my drinking. I can't use any alcohol whatsoever in any form, because I never want that to happen again, what happened to me that weekend. So now I've got the gift of desperation. I got a sponsor. I asked a woman to be my sponsor, and I almost threw up doing that, you guys, because alcoholics don't like to ask for help. I don't know. I don't. I said, will you be my sponsor? And she said yes. And I thought, oh, great. She said, you're going to come to my house every Saturday, and we're going to work the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're going to start this Saturday. And I remember thinking, aren't we moving too fast? But I didn't say it out loud. I said, okay. So I went over her house on Saturday. Friday night, I made a list of my problems, because I thought that's what you do with a sponsor, is you talk about your problems endlessly. And so I wrote down my problems. I had 147 problems. And I numbered them. I went over her place and I pulled out this paper from my pocket, and she goes, "What's that?" And I said, "It's a list of my problems." And she laughed. She said, "Why don't you put them away? And we'll talk about them later." And I said, "When?" And because, and she said, "We're going to talk about your problems after you finish the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous." And I'm thinking, oh my God, I hope this woman knows what she's doing. I had a lot of consequences because of my drinking. I had a lot of problems. I had no driver's license. I had no job. I was unemployable. I had health problems. I had broken relationships. I had a lot of amends to make, and I needed to get busy. And so we got busy. And we started working the steps. Worked step 1. I was primed and ready for step 1. Absolutely, I am powerless over alcohol. And my life is completely unmanageable. We had no problem with that one. We got to step 2, and I had a little bit of problem with the God thing. And that's why when I looked at the steps up on the wall at my first meeting, I thought, I can't go there with the God thing. I've tried church. I've tried different churches, and it is just, that route doesn't work for me. We're going to have to go around that. So I asked her if we could please skip the steps that had God in it, and she said no, that we couldn't. And she said this really brilliant thing. She says, "Maggie, why don't you choose a God of your own understanding?" And I thought, this woman is brilliant. I didn't know she'd read the big book, of course. I saw it in there later, and she didn't make that up. So she helped me to develop a God of my own understanding. And she said, on step 2, we come to believe that a power greater than ourselves, you can call it God, you can call it nirvana, you can call it universe, you can call it whatever you want, but it has to be a power greater than yourself. And you have to come to believe that this power can help you because you have no power. You have no power. So I finally I wrote it out, and I got this higher power that I could work with, and we went on to step 3. Wasn't quite sure about step 3. Term your will in your life. Who would, really looking back, who would want my will in my life? Term my will in my life, made a decision to turn my will in my life over the care of God as I understood. Wasn't sure about that. So we kind of moved on, and I did my 4th step, and I finished my steps with her. And the purpose of the steps, in my opinion, is that it leads us to the spiritual awakening. And my husband's former sponsor, Sandy Beach, when he worked with a guy, he would always take him to the 12th step first and say, look, this is what we're going for. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. That way you know what you're headed for, which I think is genius. Show them that first and then go back to step 1. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, my life changed, my thinking changed, my personality changed. I was willing to do things in those steps that when I began, I was never going to make amends. I was never going to tell this woman everything. I had it already worked out. And I told her I already worked step 9. I did it on my own. And that was stupid. There's something about those amends steps. There's really something about those. As clumsy and inexperienced with the steps, we take one step towards God, trying to do something right in our life, like sitting those kids down and making amends to them and telling them, I'm really sorry for all the pain that I've caused you. And I explained to my kids, I'm an alcoholic, and this is what an alcoholic is. And we talked about a few things, and they got really bored really fast. And they said, can we go out and play now? So that was it. The next day, my youngest went to school and told his teacher, his first grade teacher, that my mom's an alcoholic. And of course, then it's parent-teacher night, like 2 days after that. And so she comes up to me, and she's smiling, and she says, Andrew says you're an alcoholic. I'm sure she hears all kinds of stuff from first graders, right? But maybe that was a little unusual. And I got really embarrassed, but somewhere inside me, because I think those promises were coming true for me, we'd intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. I think in the past I would have run out of the room. But what came out of me was, yes, I am an alcoholic. I'm a sober alcoholic, and I'm sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And she said, that's really great. I wish you the best of luck. And the next week I joined the PTA. I'd always wanted to be in the PTA, but I was too much of a drunk to ever do that. So anyway, it was a new life for me. And there's something about those amends steps that are absolutely incredible. You know, once we've had a spiritual awakening, like I said before, we go into this book and we find things that we never saw before. One of the things I want to talk about tonight is, and there is a solution. All that trouble, there is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride. I hated that. That was painful. But something inside me, the grace of God was helping me get through this stuff, which the process requires for its successful consummation, which is a spiritual awakening. But we saw that it really worked in others. That's what kept me coming back to Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew you guys were drunks, and I knew you were sober today. And I didn't know how you did that, but there was some kind of power in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and the steps in the book that kept you sober, and I thought maybe that'll work for me. We'd come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. When therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up a simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. So what are these spiritual tools? I learned all my spiritual tools through the steps and from you guys. And I pay attention when I'm in meetings, you guys. And if I hear something that you're talking about a certain problem or something like that, and you point out something in this big book that worked for you, I'm listening. Because I'm thinking, well, if it worked for him, if it worked for Pete, maybe it'll work for me. Turn it over. Oh, my God. Step 3. Newcomers have so many problems. You know, I told you about my 147 problems. You know, most of those problems died in neglect while I was working the steps. The ones that were left over, my sponsor had a solution for them. You have a revoked driver's license. Yes. You're going to write a letter to DMV, and you're going to tell them that you've been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous for a year, and you're going to ask them, what do you need to do to get your license back? I had never approached life like this before. Like really straight on, just go up and say, here's the deal, what do I need to do? I'd never done that. I would rather go without a driver's license, just take the back roads all the time. I said, look, they're never going to give me my license back. And she said, you write that letter and don't worry about it. So I was kind of scared of her. So I wrote the letter. I sent it in to the DMV. They sent me a letter a couple of weeks later, and they set up a date for me to come in for an interview in driver safety. I had a revoked license because of loss of consciousness behind the wheel of a car, and I had 2 DUIs in 1 week. I was on work project for those DUIs for 18 months, washing sheriff cars every Saturday. I was there so long, they made me a foreman. That's why I didn't have a driver's license. I went into this interview because my sponsor made me, and they had my file. They had a tape recorder on the table. They were asking me questions I couldn't answer because I was in a blackout. Evidently, I've been driving down Highway 50 in the station wagon, and somehow I ended up on the side of the road in the ice plant, and the CHP showed up, fire truck showed up, 2 or 3 motorists came by and stopped, and an ambulance came, and they took me to the hospital. They said I gave statements out on the side of the road. I don't remember anything. I was in complete blackout, but I'm learning all this stuff by listening to her read a report. And I couldn't answer her questions. And I kept saying, I've been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous for a year, and I have a letter here from my sponsor, and I can't answer your questions because I don't remember. And I kept saying that. And she ended the interview. She said, okay, I'm going to end the interview now, and we'll let you know. Now, what does that mean to you guys? Forget about it. About a month later, I received a driver's license in the mail. It was a 4-year probationary. I didn't even know they had probationary licenses for 4 years. But I got a license. And here's something really funny. 5 years later, I went to work for DMV. God has a sense of humor. I got a job in the legal department as a paralegal. And I used to see those letters all the time. And I loved them. I've been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for a year now. What do I need to do to get my license? And I would put them at the top of a pile. I said, every single one of these people in AA are getting their license back pronto. So don't think this stuff doesn't work. It works. Back to my toolkit. Step 1 taught me that I was powerless over alcohol. I love Father Tom says there's 3 things that he cannot change. He said, I can't change the past, I can't change the truth, and I can't change you. He said that takes care of my whole day. That frees up my whole day. He says, what do you have power over? Attitude and behavior. That's what I have power over. And that's what I know today. And man, I want to have power over you so bad when you're not doing things right. I want to be able to straighten you out and fix you. And there's a program for that called Al-Anon that Tom sent me to. Step 2, my tools is remember to pray. Do you guys ever forget about God when you're in the middle of a problem? You know, and like maybe 2 days later, it's like, oh yeah, God has the power. Start praying. So to remember God and that God has a purpose for me. When I empty myself of self, then God could get through and put me on my path so I can go about my Father's business. Don't have a way. That's one of my favorite. Most of the time this comes from Sandy Beach, most of the time when we're upset, it's because we're not getting our way. Not getting my way. I hate when I don't get my way. And you can get all tied up in knots when you don't get your way. But the simple spiritual solution to that is don't have a way. Don't have a way. So that's letting go. I don't have a way. And after I heard that, at Sandy's funeral, Frank and I go to this restaurant in Florida, and we get they give us the worst table in the place, right by the kitchen door that's swinging back and forth. My food's burnt, all this stuff. He goes, do you want to send that back? I said, no, I don't have a way. I'm just going to eat it. So that's when I started practicing that. It's hard, but you can do it. How important is it? I learned that in Al-Anon. How important is this? That's one of my tools. I have to assess. Is it a 2 or a 10? Most of my stuff is 2, maybe 3. Honest to God. It's not really that big of a deal. But my mind likes to make it a big deal. I have to constantly examine my motives. And I have to constantly examine my fear. The sponsor I have now, her name is Janice. She's always like, call me with your 10th step. Okay, you don't get to bitch and complain. You have to call with the 10th step. Thank God. Because we're here to do the work. And if we're not doing 10th step, we're not doing the work. So here's how I do my 10th step. When I have a resentment, I say, dear God, I am mad at blank. The cause is this, and this is what it affects. My fear is, now she's real big on getting into that fear. because that's part of our spiritual malady. If I can get to the bottom of my fears, that resentment melts away because I realize I'm just afraid. I'm just afraid of this. And if I can put my reliance on God instead of on me or other people, I can get through it. Obsessions. Oh, I'm such an obsessive person. I got an obsession one time. Frank went to Hawaii. He asked me to go to Hawaii with him. We weren't even married yet. And I said, no, I don't want to go to Hawaii. So he goes without me. And I'm mad because he went without me. So I call my sponsor and I'm like, I am so mad. And I explained to her and she goes, I want you to get on your knees and I want you to ask God. You stay on your knees and you ask God to remove that obsession. I said, what obsession? She said, about Frank going to Hawaii. How do you know? I hate when sponsors talk to me like this. How do you know that God didn't send Frank to Hawaii for a specific purpose? God's business. And I thought, well, I never thought about that. She goes, you get on your knees and pray till that obsession's gone. And she hung up on me. So I got on my knees, 45 minutes. I prayed. The obsession was lifted. Thank God. I can't get rid of obsessions on my own. I have to have God's help. Making amends promptly or forgiving. Anything that comes up, any conflict or friction I have, I need to either make an amends to someone or I need to ask for that person's forgiveness. Taking prompt action. Getting into service. I love service. Service has saved my life on many, many occasions. Frank and I are really active in H&I work. We both have commitments down at the Sacramento Main Jail. And how long have I talked? Too long?
No, you're fine.
Okay. Before I get into that, I want to tell you that when I quit drinking, I had my husband had come back to live with me and the kids, and he was drinking, and I quit drinking. And I did not try to get him sober. I said, if you want to drink, that's your business, but don't drink here in this house. You drink in the parking lot, you can drink at the bar, you can drink at work, you can drink in your car, I don't care. Just don't bring any booze in the house. And he didn't for about 4 months, and then he did, because he had a toothache, alkalogic, and so I kicked him out. But I want to tell you this, I lived with a drunk for 2 years, sober. You know, this comes up a lot for a lot of people, and I'm not saying it was a walk in the park, but I had a sponsor that helped me to get into the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous and showed me that part of the big book that says, burn into the consciousness of every man that they can stay sober under any condition, even living with a drunk, as long as they trust God and clean house. And she was on me all the time about that. And so he and I ended up getting divorced, and I had made my amends to him on more than one occasion. First was by letter, and the second one was a face-to-face amends, and then I had another face-to-face amends with him. And I got to clean house with him. Now, I was always waiting for him to make amends to me. He had stopped drinking, but that never happened. And 7 years ago, he ended up in the hospital, and he was dying. He was dying of cirrhosis of the liver because he quit drinking, but it was just too late. And sometimes that happens. And I was at his deathbed. And I'm telling you guys, I was there to be of service to my kids and there to be of service to his family. But in the back of my mind, I'm still waiting for those amends. Right? I'm sorry, I'm just human. They never came. But what I realized was it's more important that I make my amends. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter what I want. Right, Ross? It doesn't matter what I want. God has a plan for me. And as long as I empty myself of self, do my best here with this program that we have, this beautiful gift that we have, my life is really good. Frank and I are taking off July 10th. We're going to Europe. Not too bad for a couple of shaggy drunks. We're going to Paris for about 8 days. My son lives there. He has an apartment, 2 bedrooms. I said, 1 bedroom's mine. He said, okay. We have 3 grandchildren together. My grandchildren have never smelled booze on my breath, and I pray God it always stays that way. I wasn't the greatest parent in the world, but I'm a really good grandma. I really am. And I appreciate my grandchildren, and I am a big part of their lives. And Frank and I get to do H&I work. We did 4 years out at Folsom Prison together, bringing a step study into the inmates there. And I got to tell you, I was a little nervous at first. Walking through Folsom Prison, right through the barracks, right through the yard, right past the showers. No, I didn't want to look at that. But what a spiritual experience that was, because I can tell you this about H&I work. Where God is most needed, God is most present. And if I just suit up and show up, whether I want to or not, at Folsom Prison, at Sacramento County Main Jail, at Mule Creek Prison, at VOA, at DNA Detox, I love Skid Row. I really do. Sober. Because where God is most needed, God is most present. I have had amazing spiritual experiences up on the 7th floor of the main jail. And I'm getting tired. I'm going to lose my voice, so I'm going to end this. If you're new, I hope you're not as stupid as long as I was about this thing. Give it a chance. Thoroughly follow our path. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. I was not willing to thoroughly follow the path. I wasn't even willing to go near the path my first go around. And I suffered for that. I suffered for that. When I told them I got drunk, you know what they said? Of course you did.
Right?
Get a sponsor. Work the steps with that sponsor. Come to a lot of meetings. Go to some newcomer. Go to book study. God, there's nothing better you can do than to sit in a room with everybody that's got their book open and they're studying the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you get to hear their experience with that book. You get to hear these wonderful stories. You get to begin to form a vision for yourself, what your future is going to look like. There's a chapter in here called A Vision for You. Mark's my sidekick. I pay him to do that. I'm just going to end it with my usual story. A couple of years ago, I was up at the main jail on the 7th floor, and we had a new girl in there. Her name was Lisa, and she said she gave me permission to tell this story. She was new. She just got booked in that day. And she's already in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And my jail partner, Lynn, and I, each did about 15 minutes. We picked a topic. We opened it up for discussion. I went to my left. I said, "You're new here. I haven't met you before." She said, "My name's Lisa." And I said, "Would you like to say anything?" And she started crying. She was crying hysterically. She could not hold it together. And I said, "Well, maybe you'd like to share next time." And she goes, "No, I need to share tonight." I said, "Okay." So she hiccuped for a while, and then she started telling her story. She got a DUI on Sunday night. It was her 4th DUI. The DUI happened out in Ione. She got taken to Sacramento County Jail. Her husband picked her up the next morning. She said, "I was in a lot of trouble because it's my 4th DUI." And he was mad. And the vehicle that I got arrested in had his tools in it. and he needed his tools for work. And so he came and picked me up. He said, "You're driving." I was hungover, I was sick, I felt horrible. He said, "Let's go over to the tow yard and get the car." Drove over to the tow yard to get the car. It was Columbus Day, but they said we could have got it, but it hadn't been released by the sheriff yet. So we asked, "Can we get the tools out?" And they said yes. So we got the tools out, we put them in the back of the truck. I got behind the wheel of the car again, and we were going to go over to the animal control and pick up the dog that got arrested also. And so they went over animal control, but it was closed. Or they were on their way over there. And he said, "Hold on, I want to stop at my daughter's house." And she said, "I just want to go home. I've had a hell of a night." He said, "I want to go to my daughter's house. Go over there now." She said, "I'm in trouble, 4th DUI." So I drove her to the daughter's house. We walked inside, and she handed me a tall Coors beer. And she said, "I remember popping it and drinking it, and I asked for another one. And I remember her handing me the next beer and popping the top, and I don't remember anything after that." And I came out of a blackout at UC Davis Medical Center, and there were 2 doctors in the room with me, and they were having me sign a piece of paper saying that I was okay. I had some scratches and bruises, but I was all right. And they said, "By the way, there's a couple of sheriff deputies out here that want to talk to you." This is not good news, you guys. The sheriffs came in and arrested her. And she said, "What's going on? I don't even know what's going on." And they said, you were behind the wheel of a car, intoxicated. You blew a red light at Sunrise in Jackson. You T-boned a school bus. Luckily, there were no children on it, but your husband was killed. And I remember looking at her and thinking, that is me. That is me. I had complete identification with her. How many times have I done that? How many times have I been putting people's lives in danger because I'm okay? I'm all right. I can drive. Selfish, self-centered behavior. Not thinking that would ever happen to me. So it was identification. I didn't know what to say to her. I finally said, "Lisa, I'm going to pray for you." And here's the beautiful story of it. We take a meeting in there twice a week. She went to every meeting. She started to, she grieved her husband. She got into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. She got a sponsor. I remember the day she finally got step 1, and she couldn't wait till after the meeting because she wanted to ask me questions about, "This is what step 1 is, da, 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 da." And I go, "That's exactly what it is." And she goes, "Thank you, God, I finally got it." She continued to work the steps while she was waiting to go to court, and she had completed her steps, made her amends, did her 4th and 5th step, and she went into court, and she was charged with felony manslaughter, and it was her 3rd strike. So she was going to Chowchilla for a long, 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 long time. And she told me before she left, she said, "Maggie, it's okay. I am going to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to the women in Chowchilla prison." And she was beaming. And so I have no doubt that tonight at Chowchilla prison, Lisa's out there carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to those girls coming in there. Isn't that wonderful? Really, really wonderful. And with that, I think I am just going to sit down and shut up. Thank you very much for having me.